There's a man in this story who mopped the same hospital hallway every night for 3 years. Nobody learned his name. Nobody asked. And the night Marcus Holt, CEO of one of Calgary's largest private healthcare networks, decided to follow him, everything Marcus thought he knew about himself turned out to be wrong. I want you to stay with me on this one. Because this isn't just a story about a janitor. It's about what we choose not to see. The Foothills Medical Pavilion sat on the west edge of Calgary, like a quiet promise. 12 floors of glass and pale limestone. The kind of building that looked expensive without trying to show it. Marcus Holt, 53, broad-shouldered, silver at the temples, with the kind of jaw that looked carved rather than grown, had built the place from a regional clinic into a flagship private network over 2 decades. He wore his reputation like a second suit, precise, pressed, never wrinkled. He arrived every morning at 6:47 a.m. He left every evening at 7:15. He did not vary. He did not deviate. And he had not, in 11 years of running that building, once eaten in the staff cafeteria. That was the thing about Marcus Holt. He managed people the way you manage a balance sheet. Efficiently, from a distance, and always with the assumption that the numbers didn't have feelings. His executive assistant, Priscilla Vane, 41, sharp-eyed, with the kind of calm that came from having survived 4 different management regimes, placed the security report on his desk on a Tuesday morning in February. She set it down without a word. She had learned that the way you handed Marcus something told him more than what was inside it. He picked it up. The report was routine: overnight security logs, incident flags, shift anomalies. His QO had flagged one item. 3rd floor. The cleaning crew. 1 staff member, a contract janitor, registered under the name Elliot Bassett, had been recorded leaving the service entrance at 10:47 p.m. on 6 separate occasions over the past month. His shift ended at 8:30. That was 2 hours and 17 minutes. Every time. Marcus read it twice. Then he set it down and looked out the window at the gray Calgary sky. "Pull his file," he said. Elliot Bassett, 31, was the kind of man you looked at and immediately looked away from. Not because there was anything wrong with him, but because there wasn't enough to catch your eye. Medium height, lean in the way that came from not eating well rather than from working out. He wore his gray maintenance uniform 2 sizes too large. His face was quiet. Not sad, not happy. Just still, like a lake on a windless day. He had worked the overnight rotation at the pavilion for 3 years. His performance reviews were impeccable. Never late. Never absent, never filed a complaint. His supervisor, a man named Devin Carruthers, who managed 14 contract staff, had written in his most recent review, "Bassett does his job and then some. Reliable as a clock. Doesn't say much." That was it. That was the whole picture anyone at the pavilion had of him. What the file did not say, what no one at that building knew, was that before Elliot Bassett took a contract mopping job in a Calgary hospital, he had spent 4 years at the University of Alberta completing a master's degree in social work, followed by 18 months working crisis intervention in Edmonton. It did not say that he had left that work after something happened that he did not talk about to anyone, that he had needed somewhere quiet to land, somewhere with a routine that asked nothing of him emotionally, somewhere he could be invisible, while he figured out whether he still wanted to do the work that used to be his whole identity. It did not say any of that, because nobody had asked. Marcus assigned the follow-up to Raymond Silk, 47, head of facilities security, a compact, methodical man who wore clip-on ties and had never, in Marcus's memory, brought him an incomplete report. Raymond was not a suspicious man by nature, but he was thorough, and thorough was what Marcus wanted right now. "I want to know what he's doing with the extra time," Marcus said, discreetly. Raymond nodded once. "I'll have something by Thursday." What Raymond brought back on Thursday was not what Marcus expected. Elliot Bassett, on those 6 evenings, had been walking 4 blocks north to Elgin Street, to a low-rise apartment complex called Riverside Court, the kind of place where the buzzers didn't always work, and the hallway smelled of old carpet and radiator heat. He went to Unit 14B. He knocked. He was let in. The occupant of 14B was registered as one Edna Fawcett, 78, retired schoolteacher. No listed next of kin. No emergency contact on file. No regular visitors, according to the building superintendent, a man named Phil Dreyer who had worked there since 1998 and noticed everything. She used to have a son who came around, Phil had told Raymond. Haven't seen him in going on 2 years. Marcus sat with that information longer than he expected to. He told himself he was sitting with it for professional reasons. Someone on his payroll, on his premises, potentially misusing company time. Potentially entering the private residence of a vulnerable senior. Potentially, he reached for the word, exploiting the situation somehow. That was what he told himself. But the thing that actually kept him sitting there, in his glass office on the 9th floor, with the Calgary skyline going dark outside, was the detail Raymond had included almost as an afterthought at the bottom of the page. Subject brought a container from the staff cafeteria on 4 of the 6 visits. Appears to be leftover food from the evening meal service. Marcus put the report face down on his desk. He thought about his own mother. Then he stopped thinking about her, the way he always did. He was very good at that. He went himself on a Friday. He told no one. He told Priscilla he had a dinner engagement, which was not entirely untrue. He had canceled one to be there. He wore his gray wool coat, the one his daughter said made him look like a detective, and he drove himself in the Audi rather than calling the car service. He parked on Elgin Street at 9:55 p.m. He didn't know why exactly. He could have watched the security footage. He could have asked Raymond to expand the surveillance. Instead, he was parked on a residential street in the February dark, 40 meters from a building he'd never set foot in, waiting. At 10:12 p.m., Elliot Bassett came around the corner. He was carrying a flat container, the kind the cafeteria used for takeaway orders, held in both hands, carefully, the way you carry something hot. He had his earbuds in. He wasn't looking around. He wasn't checking over his shoulder. He walked like a man who knew exactly where he was going and had made peace with the distance. Marcus watched him buzz Unit 14B, watched the door open, watched him go in. He sat in the car for 18 minutes. Then he got out. The superintendent, Phil Dreyer, was still in his ground floor office when Marcus knocked. Phil was a stout man in his late 60s with a white mustache and the kind of wary friendliness you developed after decades of managing tenant complaints. He looked at Marcus's wool coat and his business card and seemed to recalibrate something. "You're from the hospital," Phil said. "I am. I'm trying to understand the situation with your tenant in 14B and the young man who visits her." Phil studied him. "You looking to get the kid in trouble?" "No," Marcus said, and surprised himself because he meant it. Phil made a sound that was either a laugh or a cough. "Kid's been coming every Friday night for 8 months. Sometimes a Tuesday too when she's having a bad week." He leaned back in his chair. "Mrs. Fawcett's got arthritis bad in both hands. Can't cook much anymore. Doesn't like to ask for help. Never complains." A pause. "He brings her dinner, sits with her for an hour, helps her with whatever she needs. Light bulbs, her calendar appointments, whatever. Leaves before 11. Does she have family?" Phil's expression went flat. "She's got a son, lives in Oakville. Comes at Christmas when it suits him." He said it the way you say something you've said before and stopped, being surprised by. Marcus looked at the floor. The carpet was the color of old mustard. "Does she know he works at the hospital?" The young man. "She knows he's a janitor. She calls him her Friday person." Phil smiled, just slightly. "She doesn't call him anything else. Doubt she knows his last name." Marcus went home that night and did not sleep. He lay in his house on Varsity Drive, 4 bedrooms, a kitchen his ex-wife had chosen, a study where he kept the things he told himself he would eventually deal with. And he thought about a woman named Edna Fawcett who called a janitor her Friday person. He thought about his own mother. Her name was Helen Holt. She was 74 years old, and she lived in a retirement community in Kelowna that Marcus paid for and visited twice a year at Christmas and in August, when it was convenient. She had called him 3 weeks ago. He had returned the call 4 days later. They had spoken for 12 minutes. He had said he was busy, and she had said she understood, and they had both said they would talk soon, and neither of them had called since. He thought about that for a long time. He did not let himself feel it completely. He was too practiced for that. But something got through. Something small and persistent, like a sound you can't locate in a quiet house. He thought, there is a 31-year-old man mopping hospital floors who has time for an old woman's loneliness, and I am a man who runs a 12-floor healthcare facility and cannot find 12 minutes. He got up at 2 a.m. and sat in the kitchen and made coffee he didn't drink. On Monday, he called Elliot Bassett to his office. He had arranged it through Devon Carruthers, who had clearly panicked and spent the weekend imagining a dozen scenarios, none of them good. Elliot arrived at 9 a.m. He was in his civvies, dark jeans, a gray pullover that had been washed too many times, clean work boots. He sat in the chair across from Marcus's desk and put his hands on his knees and waited. He did not look afraid. He looked careful, like a man who had learned not to show his hand too early. Marcus studied him for a moment. You've worked here for 3 years. Yes, 3rd floor, overnight rotation. That's right. You're consistently one of the highest-rated contract staff in the building. Elliot said nothing to that. Marcus leaned forward slightly. I know about Mrs. Fawcett. Something moved across Elliot's face. Not guilt, more like the look of a man calculating how much of himself is willing to expose. He said, carefully, I met her in the cafeteria waiting area about a year ago. She came in with her son. They were waiting to see someone on the cardiology floor. Her son took a call and just walked away. She was sitting there alone for 40 minutes. He paused. I was on break. I sat with her. We talked. Another pause. Her son didn't come back. A nurse ended up taking her upstairs. Silence. I got her phone number before she left, Elliot said. She gave it to me herself. I called her a few weeks later to see how she was doing. It went from there. Marcus sat very still. You bring her food from the cafeteria. The leftovers were going to be thrown out. I checked with the kitchen. They don't have a policy against it. I asked. I know, Marcus said quietly. I checked. Elliot looked at him with those careful, still eyes. Marcus said, she has a son. Yes, he doesn't come, not often. Elliot said it without judgment, without the edge Marcus had expected, just a fact, recorded and accepted. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then, why do you do it? You finish your shift. You're tired. It's late. What? Ree stopped it. Why does it matter to you? Elliot looked at him for a long time. Then he said something Marcus would think about for years. He said, because it matters to her, and she doesn't have anyone who shows up. He said it the way you say something true, without decoration. Marcus called his mother that evening. He called at 7 p.m. before he could talk himself out of it. He sat in his car in the parkade and called her cell. She answered on the second ring. She sounded surprised, not unhappy, not performatively warm, just genuinely surprised. Marcus, she said. Hi, Mum. A small pause. Is everything all right? Everything's fine, he said. And then he stopped trying to have a reason for calling and said, I just wanted to hear your voice. There was a longer pause. Then Helen Holt, who had not cried on the phone with her son in a very long time, made a sound that was not quite crying but was close enough. They talked for an hour and 20 minutes. He hadn't talked to her for that long in years. She told him about her neighbor's garden and the new instructor for her Thursday watercolor class and the book she was reading, a mystery set in Edinburgh, and Marcus sat in the dark parkade and listened to every word like it was something he'd been starving for without knowing it. When he finally said goodnight, he sat there for a while longer. He thought, that cost me nothing, and I waited this long. He did not fire Elliot Bassett. He did something that surprised everyone who knew him, including himself. He called his HR director, a woman named Joan Fielding, 55, who had once told a junior colleague that Marcus Holt ran the warmest numbers and the coldest hallways she'd ever seen. He told Joan he wanted to create a new role, a pilot position, half-time to start, focused on patient and community social navigation. identifying isolated patients before discharge, connecting elderly outpatients with existing community programs, coordinating between the social work team and long-term care, a bridge role that the hospital technically needed and technically couldn't find the budget for, and somehow never prioritized. Joan stared at him for a long moment. "Who would fill it?" she asked. "I have someone in mind," he said. "He has a master's in social work from U of A. He's been working our overnight janitorial rotation for 3 years." Another pause. Our janitor. His name is Elliot Bassett," Marcus said, "and he's been doing this work for free, on his own time for the past 8 months. I think it's time we paid him for it." He offered Elliot the position on a Wednesday afternoon. Elliot sat in the same chair he'd sat in before and listened to the whole thing without interrupting. When Marcus finished, Elliot was quiet for a long time. "Why?" he finally asked. Marcus considered being diplomatic. Then he decided against it. "Because I saw what you do, and I recognized what I don't, and I have enough self-awareness left to know the difference." Elliot looked at him steadily. "What about Mrs. Fawcett?" Marcus said. "She's been added to the outreach list as of this morning. She'll be getting weekly check-in calls from our social work coordinator. And I've personally arranged for meal delivery 3 times a week through a local seniors program. It goes through the hospital community fund." Something shifted in Elliot's face. Just slightly. The careful, still quality softened by a fraction. He said, "She'll pretend she doesn't need it." "I know," Marcus said. "I talked to her this morning." Elliot looked up sharply. "I introduced myself as someone from the hospital. Told her she'd been flagged for our community outreach program. She told me she was perfectly fine and didn't need anyone fussing over her." A small pause. Then she asked if I knew the young man who worked there. "Said he brings her dinner on Fridays." Elliot was quiet. "I told her he'd just been promoted." The part of this story that didn't make it into any report, any file, any email chain, the part that only Marcus knew, and that I'm telling you now, is what happened after Marcus hung up from his mother that night in the parkade. He sat there and he thought about Edna Fawcett's son in Oakville. He thought about how easy it was to become that person, how you didn't decide one morning to stop showing up. You just postponed, and then postponed again, and the distance became the normal. And the normal became the story you told yourself, which was, "She's fine. She's in a good place. She has what she needs." He had been telling himself that story for 2 years. He thought about a 31-year-old man carrying takeaway containers through a February night to sit with someone else's loneliness. Someone he had met once in a waiting room when her own son walked away to take a call. He thought, "What kind of man am I?" He didn't have a good answer. But for the first time in a long time, he thought, maybe the answer can change. He booked a flight to Kelowna for the following weekend. Not Christmas, not August, just a Friday in February, because he wanted to go, because it had been too long, because his mother had said, "Is everything all right?" when he called, and that question had broken something open in him that needed to stay open. He called Helen from the airport. "I'm coming tomorrow," he said. She was quiet for a moment. Then, "I'll make the guest room up." "Mum, I'm staying at a hotel, you don't have to." "I'll make the guest room up," she said again, and he could hear her smiling. "I made that shortbread you like. I was going to send it to you, but I've been waiting for a reason to eat it myself." He laughed. It came out rough and unpracticed, the laugh of a man who'd been out of the habit. "Save some for me," he said. Elliot Bassett started the new role on the 1st of March. He wore the same gray pullover on his first day in the new office. Joan Fielding gave him a badge and a desk and a plant she'd bought at the farmer's market. A small pothos, she said, was impossible to kill, which she seemed to believe was an encouraging metaphor. He was good at the work, not in the way you are when you're performing competence, in the way you are when something is genuinely yours. He knew how to sit with people. He knew how to ask the question that got to the real question. He knew how to call a son or a daughter or a nephew and say, very calmly, without accusation, "Your family member is alone, and they need you to show up more than you think they do." He had a way of saying it that made people hear it without shutting down. Marcus noticed, because Marcus noticed most things now in a way he hadn't before. He had started eating in the staff cafeteria twice a week, not for any official reason. He told himself it was because the salmon was good on Thursdays and the parking was easier if he didn't leave the building for lunch. No one believed him. Joan Fielding told Priscilla Vane that something had clearly happened to Marcus Holt, and she wasn't sure what, but she wasn't going to question it. Priscilla just said, he called his mother last week. Twice. The last Friday in March, Elliot left the building at 8:30 p.m., his new hours, his actual hours, and walked north to Elgin Street. He buzzed 14B. The door opened. Marcus sat in his car at the end of the block. He wasn't there to watch. He'd just parked there on his way somewhere else and then not driven away. He watched the light come on in the second-floor window. He watched the shadow of Edna Fawcett move past the glass. He sat there for a while. Then he picked up his phone and called Kelowna. "Hi, Marcus." A pause, but a warm one now. The pause of someone whose phone rings and knows the voice before the name. "I was just thinking about you." "Yeah," he said. "Good things, I hope." "Mostly," she said, which made him laugh again. That rough, unpracticed laugh that was slowly finding its shape. "Tell me about the watercolor class," he said, and he listened. In a parked car on Elgin Street, in a city learning to thaw, with a light on in a second-floor window where someone who had been forgotten was, for an hour a week, remembered. Marcus Holt finally listened. "You know, when I first looked into this story, I expected to find something simple, a good person doing good things, an easy lesson. What I found instead was harder and more honest than that. Because the real story here isn't just about Elliot Bassett. It's about how many Edna Fawcetts there are in every city, in every building, in every retirement community we drive past without looking. It's about how many of us have a parent, a grandparent, a neighbor, someone we mean to call, someone we keep meaning to visit, and we don't. Not because we're cruel, because we're busy, because we're uncomfortable, because the distance made it easy to forget. And it's about what happens when something or someone forces you to see it. Marcus Holt had every resource in the world. The one thing he'd run out of was attention. And Elliot Bassett, who had very little else, had never run out of that. If there's a Solomon in your life, someone showing up quietly, without applause, carrying something warm through the cold, I want you to think about who taught them that. And then I want you to think about whether you're showing up the same way for the people in your own life who are waiting. Leave a comment below and tell me, who's the person in your life who shows up without being asked? Who's your Friday person? If this story moved you even a little, please share it. Someone you know needs to hear it today. And if you're new here, welcome to DELL Stories. We find the people the world forgot to notice. Hit subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next.